Welcome back, everybody. My name's Adam, and I just kind of wanted to talk to you guys a little bit today, kind of about who I am and why we're doing this, I guess. You know, just kind of a meet and greet, more or less. So, growing up, motorcycles weren't really not really anything that was on my horizon. You know, I had seen some towards middle school. I found out a friend that his dad was really big into motorcycles, and of course, you know, he was because his dad was. But they weren't really anything spectacular to me. I was definitely more into the classic muscle cars. So it was one of those things. I would really enjoy checking out those, going to Woodward Dream Cruise. You know, being in Michigan, Woodward is pretty big event. In my hometown, there was usually a cruise night that would happen, you know, one weekend in the summer, and you know, everybody bring out whatever they happen to have. A lot of times it was classic cars, it was the old hot rods, things like that. You wouldn't see too many people riding around with a classic Model A. You wouldn't see much of that, but you would see, you know, somebody that might have hot rodded one out. You know, they put a V8 on there and they chopped it down and things like that. Anyways, so that was more my scene when I was younger. That's the kind of thing that really got me going. But in 2014 or 2015, and Matt would know exactly when it was because that's when he got into bikes, he picked up a motorcycle. And so he went through, figured out what he wanted, and Matt and I are cousins. We're super close. We're the closest thing to either of us actually having to a biological brother. We're only a few months apart in age, so, you know, a lot of our interests and things like that have been very similar pretty much for as long as we can remember. So we ended up, Matt wants to go pick up this bike. I go with him to help him out. That's one of those things we always end up doing that back and forth. Matt just had to work on his truck not too long ago. I went and helped him. I just had my hot water heater just went out. Matt's the first one I called. Hey, can you help me lug this 50-gallon hot water tank down my ridiculously rickety and dangerous stairs without a railing? And we're right there. We're always helping each other. So anyways, I go with Matt to help him get this bike, and you know, we get it loaded up. I'm like, you know, this is kind of cool. And he's riding it around, you know, because when you first get the bike, you ride everywhere. Literally every single place you go, you've got your bike. So that's what ended up happening, and it got me into motorcycles. And it was probably a couple months after that I wanted to get one, you know. So Matt's father-in-law was selling two motorcycles. He was selling the one that he had just upgraded from, and he had another one that was sitting in a side garage that, you know, it was one of those things he hadn't ridden in a long time, and it needed a lot of love. Well, I have, at this point now, a wife and 3 kids. At that point, I had a wife and 1 kid, and we had only been married for maybe about a year, a little over a year. And so it was one of those things. I didn't have a whole lot of money to throw around to be buying a bike. So Matt's father-in-law was like, I'll let that one in the garage go for $500. Yeah, all right, cool. You know, $500, that's a good price for a motorcycle. And so I picked that up, it needed a little bit of work. He was, you know, really transparent on what did and didn't need to be done. So I'm like, all right, that's not a big deal. It needed the carburetors to be cleaned out, and it probably needed a little bit of wiring. Now, wiring's definitely not my thing. I'm colorblind, so to trace down the purple and blue wire is just not a good idea for me. Either something's just not going to work right, or I'm going to ground it out and start a fire. So I ended up, it's actually still sitting in my garage, but it was one of those things to where I figured I could get this thing up on the road. It'll be my first bike. I didn't put a lot of money into it. It'll be something kind of fun, and it just didn't happen. So anyways, a few years go by, and you know, every tax return I ask my wife, I'm like, so can I, like, you know, $100, something like that, throw out the motorcycle? I think I can get it riding in $100. Yeah, it never happened that way, but I attempted to, and it's still sitting in my garage, not running. But with the pandemic, we were obviously given the stimulus checks for everybody being unemployed. So I asked my wife, like, can I get a motorcycle with my stimulus money? You know, and you know, like maybe with a little extra cash that we've got set aside. And you know, of course, my wife is awesome, and she said yes. She's the one who does all the finances in the house. I go to work, she figures out where the money gets spent. It works out pretty well that way. I can't go through and say, well, I made all the money, I decide that we're gonna spend it all on me. So anyways, we ended up, she told me I could get it, and I'm looking around trying to find bikes, and I didn't really know what I wanted. Like I said, I had a buddy, his dad had a motorcycle. He actually had a Harley, and I had another good friend. I was friends with the son first, and then I became friends with the dad, and he was a big Harley guy, you know. And so I was like, yeah, I could get a Harley, but yet on the other hand, this is my first motorcycle, and my wife's uncle, he's got a Honda Goldwing, and it's like he really loves the thing. He's had it forever, so well, maybe I'll check out a Honda. And of course, the bike that I bought from Matt's father-in-law was a Honda. It's an older Honda. It's from 1982. But I'll talk a little bit more about that another time. So anyways, I go on Facebook Marketplace, because that's pretty much the place that you go to look for vehicles anymore. That's the new Craigslist. And I found one. It was a half block away from my house. I'm sorry, from my work. A half block away from my work. And I don't live very far from work, but I definitely live more than a half block. So I ended up, I go and look at this bike, and it definitely needs a few different things. It had the footboards like this bike does, that I'll get to here in a minute. It had the footboards, but the tread was gone. It was just bare steel, and they kind of looked a little bit tacky. They were in the shape of a foot, you know, like a bare foot. And so it's like, all right, well, those are gonna have to be replaced, because any little bit of moisture, my feet are gonna be slipping off from these things all the time. And so it needed that. They took the mirrors off to sell to somebody else, because somebody wanted the mirrors. So it needed mirrors. It did not have a windshield, and that was a must for me. I had to have a windshield. Pretty much the only thing that it had going for it was the bike was in my favorite color, which is red, and it had saddlebags already. Pretty much the only things that it had going for it. So I talked to one of the workers there, because the owner wasn't there that day. And so I asked him a little bit about the bike. You know, he told me they bought it at an auction, and it needed carburetors and everything else. And so anyways, after all that, it ends up, you know, I'm kind of asking them if it, you know, if there was anything really wrong with it. And they said no. And I asked about the title. They said, oh yeah, it's a good title. Well, there wasn't much I could do. They didn't want anybody really to test ride it unless the boss was there, because they were concerned about the carburetors being gummed up again. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just wait till the boss gets there and we'll go from there. So wait a couple days, boss gets there, and I come back, ask him a little bit about the bike, had a friend test drive it, and he's like, yeah, it seems like a good bike. And so anyways, started asking a little bit more, and I double check about the title, and the owner's like, oh no, this has got a rebuilt title. And it's like, oh, so you want, I didn't actually bother asking him because there was no point. He had already told me the bike had been sitting around for a while. You know, they had a lot of people looking at it, but nobody would buy it, which, you know, go figure that nobody wants to buy it. The guy wanted full asking price. You know, he ended up, it was like $3,000 for 2000s, I don't remember what year it was, but 2000s Honda Shadow Spirit 750, $3,000 for it. I'm like, I don't think so. So I passed on that bike, kind of bummed out, looking around on Facebook, and I find this one. It's a 2006 Honda Shadow 750 Aero. A little bit different than the Spirit. The Aero has the big full fenders. It's a little bit more of what you would try and look for if you wanted an Ultra Glide. And you know, this thing already had the windshield on it. It actually had mirrors, which are kind of nice. You know, they're kind of functional, and you know, without them it's illegal. It already had the footboards, and trying to think, it had a couple things that I already wanted, but the guy had it listed for like 2 days, and he had already dropped it down like $200. Oh, this guy's a pretty motivated seller, which is great because I'm a motivated buyer. I want to get a bike. So I message him, and you know, it ends up we figure out a date to go out and check it out. And I have Matt go with me. So we go to pick up this bike, and Matt goes through and, you know, he test rides the bike when we get there, and he's like, yeah, you know, I think you're really gonna love this thing. One of the things I should mention is, at this point I wasn't indoors, so I couldn't actually ride the bike. I had the other motorcycle, but I figured, why am I gonna bother to go through and put to get my endorsement when I don't even have a motorcycle to ride? I realized at that point I could ride anybody else's motorcycle if they had let me, but I didn't see a whole lot of point into doing it. There we go. All right. So anyways, I figured there was no point in, you know, getting my endorsement until it was time that I actually needed to get one. So Matt goes with me, test rides the bike. This is in March. So in the day, it was pretty warm, you know, kind of a sweatshirt type weather. But once the sun goes down, it gets really chilly. And so we brought my pickup, figuring, you know, all right, we were going to end up loading it into the back of the truck anyways, because it's March, it's going to be cold. But Matt was kind of figuring, all right, well, I'll just, you know, I really like riding this thing, I'll just ride it home, you know. So Matt gets about a mile or so down the road, and the wind really starts whipping on him, and he's like, yeah, this probably isn't a good idea. So we get ready to load the motorcycle onto the back of my truck, get it all lined up, get it about halfway on the ramps, and they flex. And it's not just that, you know, normal flex when you're putting something heavy and it's supposed to be able to take the weight. No, they were almost bending. And so we don't have a choice in the matter. We got to get this thing home. I just paid for it. I can't turn around and say, hey, can you like hold on to this bike for 3 days while I go and get ramps? So Matt's taking this thing down the highway. It's probably, you know, mid to upper 40s Fahrenheit, so pretty chilly, going 70, 75 miles an hour. And so we make it about halfway home. The bike was about an hour away, so we're about a half hour from home. Matt pulls off at a rest stop. He looks me square in the eyes and says, what kind of what size shoes do you wear? I tell him, I'm like, well, I don't know, like 9s, 10s, depending on what they are. He's like, good, we're trading shoes. He was wearing like a tennis shoe with the mesh, and so his feet were freezing. You know, he had a hoodie on with his motorcycle jacket. He was wearing his leathers, but he had just regular tennis shoes on, so he didn't have anything to really protect his feet from the cold. And I wear, I think that'll show up in the video, I've got these steel-toed cowboy boots. You know, they're all leather. They're not letting a whole lot of cold through. So we trade shoes, and I just drove home in my socks. It was one of those things that didn't make a whole lot of sense to try and get his shoes on and stretch them out or anything else, because I have ridiculously wide feet. So we get home. He parks the bike in his garage, and I was going over to his house probably about 3 to 4 times a week, as long as the weather was somewhat decent and it wasn't raining. And I just go out, and I'd have Matt ride it to, there was a church nearby with a pretty good sized parking lot, and I just ride around in the parking lot just getting practice. You know, Matt was kind of my coach for the first little bit until I got comfortable, just showing me, you know, here's what you do to be able to start off and everything else. And so that's what I did for a while, and finally got my endorsement probably about a month and a half ago. I think it's been about a month and a half now, but I got my endorsement, and now I can ride on my own and enjoy beautiful rides like this. But yeah, so that's kind of my journey of getting into motorcycles. And you know, this isn't the first motorcycle I rode, but this is the first motorcycle that belonged to me that I've ridden. I rode Matt's first bike at one point. He was kind of showing me, you know, like here's how you get into motorcycling, and so I did that for a little bit. And so yeah, let's see. Oh, let's talk about why we're doing this. All right, so obviously Matt and I are cousins, we're close, and more or less this is just kind of an excuse for us to hang out more and, you know, have fun, you know. So it's one of those things. This is kind of a video memories that we can look back on. And you know, it's like, for me, I've been riding for about 4 months now, including that, you know, maybe 3 times a week when I was going over, and I might only do an hour a day of just working on the clutch, or maybe even just practicing how to shift gears, or figure out how to be able to operate the brakes in a way that I'm not going to end up killing myself, kind of a thing. So it's one of those things to where it's kind of a video log for us to be able to see where we're at now and where we'll be in the future. Obviously, if you guys enjoy the content, even better, and we'll put out more if that's the case. But other than that, I do hope you guys stay safe, and for all of you who are riding on bikes, keep the greasy side down and the shiny side up. Bye-bye.